Is Zelenskyy coming around to the idea that he may need to negotiate his territory back? And is he getting Trump on board? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So this has been a really interesting story because Zelenskyy has been following the negotiating playbook. Honestly, it's very similar to Putin's, where each party takes an extreme position, knowing full well they're never really going to get it, right? Unrealistically extreme positions. And then they hope that over time they can meet in the middle. But again, when you're meeting in the middle, there's an incentive to push your position and the other person's position way out there so that when you make concessions, your middle, the new middle, doesn't favor one side or the other. That's been Zelensky's MO. And that means that when it comes to talking about peace negotiations, Zelenskyy has said for a long time, there won't be any negotiations until we've pushed Russia out of Ukrainian territory. And that probably seemed pretty unrealistic, especially after kind of the collapse of the Ukrainian counteroffensive last year. But he is stuck by that position, as Putin has stuck by his own position that they can't even start negotiations until the entire Ukrainian military throws down its weapons and surrenders, which is not really strengthening any negotiating position for Ukraine. So both sides have been talking in very unrealistic terms, but recently we've seen more and more realism creeping into the discussions about the end of the war. In an interview with the BBC, Zelenskyy said that the world, meaning the Western world that sort of backs Ukraine, needs to develop a united consensus on what an end state for the war in Ukraine might look like. Then present this consensus to Russia in order to encourage Russia to come to the negotiating table. And this is something we've talked about from the earlier peace conference, in which basically that was the intent. All sides were supposed to get together and come up with a unified vision for the terms of a peace negotiation, or at least the West say, hey, we all agree that this is what our desired end state looks like. And that is at least putting a stake in the ground and saying, this is our starting point for negotiations. The whole West sees the same picture, and it's this. And then Russia can sit there and go, this is our picture. And now we've drawn the lines on the field, so to speak, and the negotiation can start to come to a central conclusion. But of course, right now, Russia is tripling down on trying to split the West. That's a core part of his strategy, because the fewer allies Ukraine has at the negotiating table, the less leverage they have to extract concessions from Russia. And a big part of that leverage is Russia's comparative disconnect from the economic system, right? And so as long as Putin recruits friends like China, North Korea, and India, there is less of an appeal by Ukraine to sit there and go, well, our friends who won't let you trade with them are people like the United States and Europe. And for Russia, that's still a big carrot. And the sanctions are honestly an increasingly small stick, but they're still a stick nonetheless. But Zelenskyy, importantly, is adding that diplomacy is going to be an important element in restoring Ukraine's territorial integrity, and that Ukraine doesn't need to liberate all of its territory by force. But he acknowledges the first victories have to come on the battlefield, that that Ukraine has to significantly weaken Russia's battlefield position to develop that negotiating position for future negotiations. And this is, again, a key strategy. Right now, the reason Putin has been so public with his absolutely crazy demands, his unrealistic, right? They're not crazy, they're smart. He's simply putting these demands out there to signal to everyone else that he has zero interest in negotiating right now, right? And when you say things like Putin's crazy or Putin's unhinged, that's not actually an accurate representation of who he is, right? He's a savvy negotiator. And when he does things that are crazy, it usually has a basis in messaging, right? And this is an example. His message is, I have no interest in negotiating, right? But because that makes him look like a warmonger, instead he says, yeah, I have interest in negotiating. All Ukraine has to do is withdraw from all contested territories, give us a whole bunch more of your terrain, and throw down your weapons, and then we'll negotiate, right? Not exactly grounded in reality. But for Zelenskyy, he knows that right now, as you can see, right, when we pull up the map, you can see that looking over time, Russia has been making a lot of advances. Now, are these advances large? No. Are they seizing territory of significant value? Not really, right? And again, note the large chunks of green here. These represent areas in Ukraine that the Ukrainians have liberated in the 2.5 years since the start of the war. You can see large territories kind of changed hands. And now we're looking at, again, a not insignificant offensive by Russia. You can see here since October in Avdiivka, they've taken a large area, but not a lot of towns, not a lot of areas of strategic significance, just sort of advancing for the sake of advancing and at tremendous, tremendous cost. But the important thing to note is that Russia is advancing in almost all cases. A few times, Ukraine is launching small, localized counterattacks to sort of blunt Russian advances or to force them out of areas that actually are important to Ukraine. But the takeaway that you should have is that Russia is sort of in the driver's seat. They're driving very slowly. It's almost they're driving so slowly. It's by military standards, it's the equivalent of getting out and pushing the car. But they are the ones in the driver's seat, and that means that Putin really this dynamic needs to reverse, because as long as Russia is in the driver's seat, they are not going to be interested in negotiating. And why would they? Every day that they advance another 200 meters, they are strengthening their negotiating position, right? Because let's say they double the territory they control, and then at the negotiating table, they yield half of the territory. Well, it can be effectively a net gain for Russia. And so Putin first needs to have his battlefield momentum stopped and then reversed. He needs to say, man, I can't stop these Ukrainians. They're pushing back. Maybe not generally, maybe not across the board, but Russia needs to have its advances stopped and to be on the defensive. Then Zelenskyy argues, then you can say, Russia, why don't we sit down at the negotiating table? And that is a statement grounded, I think, in realism, right? Now, what Zelenskyy is not saying is that his goals are anything other than the restoration of all contested areas of Ukraine, Crimea and Donbas included, right? These are areas that Russia has controlled for 10 years, but Ukraine has always maintained that they are rightfully part of Ukrainian sovereign territory. So has the international community. Of course, Ukraine also wants real long-term security guarantees. You might remember they thought they had one when they gave up their nuclear weapons in the 90s, but that obviously wasn't worth it. So they want real guarantees with real credible security, right? Like friendly units stationed in Ukraine or aid that's continually sort of flowing in. Some sort of real skin in the game guarantee, not just a piece of paper. So all of that, again, is a signal that negotiations are moving closer. And we're going to talk about why it sounds like even Trump may be on board with this. But first, of course, if you need to conquer your challenges of the day, you don't need to pull a Russia and recruit, an army of drunks to then send into a meat grinder. Instead, maybe you just need a little extra caffeine. Check out Strike Gum. Strike Gum. This is made in the USA, inspired by my time in Afghanistan when I would have to drink these Rippets, these gross energy drinks. I literally had to carry them around in my cargo pockets on patrol. And if you've ever drank an energy drink in 135-degree heat, it's lukewarm. It's an awful experience. There's no redeeming qualities to it. And so that seared in my brain that when it came time I said, I'm going to make my own. I'm going to make something better. And I did. Strike Gum. It's made in the USA, obviously veteran owned, using natural caffeine, 100 milligrams of alpha GPC. It's got the caffeine equivalent of a Red Bull or an Amp Energy in every single piece. So you can, instead of hauling around 5 Red Bulls, you could take this bad boy, throw it in your pocket, and you could have all the caffeine you need for a day. I mean, for a week, really. And you can get it at strikegum.com or at Amazon. But if you want the new user discounts, if you want the first responder and veteran discounts, you can only get those at strikegum.com. I'm going to link to both in the description. And we have the 5-pack now, right? Because, you know, you're like, 1 pack, that's a lot to ship me 1 pack. That's kind of a waste. And I don't know if I'm going to love Strike Gum enough to get the tray. So the 5-pack is the perfect middle ground. But I see the data. I see tons of people who order 1 pack or the 5-pack, and then a month later, they reorder a tray. Because it's obvious. It's better than an energy drink in every way. Cost less, more convenient, no sugar. You can't lose. So thanks to everybody that's left us those reviews on Amazon. That makes a huge difference. Tells Amazon customers that, hey, the other energy gums, you don't know, they could be made overseas, dehydrated, they taste gross. Strike Gum, the real deal, made in the USA. Okay, let's talk about what's an interesting phone call between Zelenskyy and Trump, right? And that's a sign, of course, that, you know, the Ukrainian analysts in their State Department, they're telling them, listen, both of these candidates have a very strong chance. In fact, the latest forecasts seem to place Trump's odds of victory at around 70%. So Zelenskyy says, listen, I gotta get in good with this guy. I gotta sustain that relationship, right? Because remember, Trump was not president when the war started, right? The war started under the Biden administration. So Trump isn't really that familiar with how things have really gone on, about the inner workings of this war. Of course, Zelenskyy congratulated Trump, wished him strength and a safe recovery and safety in the future. But what was most important is that while both sides agreed it was a very good call, right? And Trump has said, I'm going to bring peace. Peace is his priority, and end the war that's cost so many lives and destroyed countless families, right? The two sides can meet and negotiate an agreement that will end the violence and open the way to prosperity. That is interesting because that is not fundamentally different from what Zelensky's stance currently is. And Trump has said, I want to try to coerce both sides to really sit down together, right? And as he knows, and hopefully, as Zelenskyy told him, listen, if you want to coerce Russia, the first thing that has to happen is Russia has to stop winning, right? And if I was Zelenskyy, right, Trump is being elected or is running on being someone who's going to make America strong and respected. And I would frame it as saying, listen, America, you gave us these weapons, we've got these munitions, and we're holding the Russians back, but barely. It's embarrassing for the United States. It makes you guys look weak. It's why Putin won't negotiate, because he thinks he can get a better deal if he keeps fighting us. So maybe the U.S. should, in the short term, pump a ton of aid, really let us take the fight to the Russians, really grind them up for a couple of months, and then sit there and go, okay, here we've shown you what we can do. We've shown you what we're capable of when we're not restrained. Now let's negotiate, right? And as we've talked about, there's a lot of hand-wringing about escalation. Oh, what if it escalates? I point this out because Russian saboteurs from the FSB, Russia's State Security Bureau, have been burning down military facilities in the UK, here in the United States. They've conducted assassinations. People have died. And so to sit there and say, oh, Putin is going to feel sad or upset or feel personally offended if the U.S. expands its aid to Ukraine. Unfortunately, what does Putin think is going to happen when when his FSB agents burn down a U.S. munitions plant? This has happened. It's in Scranton. You can look it up. So I point this out because, again, I think President Trump is nothing if not somebody who understands how to negotiate a good deal and how to put the squeeze on somebody, right? They're very proud. I mean, listen, in New York real estate, if you don't know how to squeeze somebody, really put them in a vice, you'll never survive in New York real estate. I promise you that, right? So Trump knows that he needs to put the squeeze on Putin to get the deal. Question is he willing to do it? Maybe. Zelenskyy seems to think so. And, of course, Trump seems to think so as well. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Huge thank you to the Colonel tier members of Combat Vet News, including James Jerling, Steve Moran, Doug Beck, Alan Knutson, Bastian Hemmerling, Yanko Georgiev, as well as our Lieutenant tier members, all of you guys. I really could not do this without you. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you guys in the next one. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and like the video. That really helps. I'll see you. Cheers.